We just have a quick question here from David about the euro, asking whether all the euro pairs can be expected to be affected by Brexit comments and whether all euro pairs will be affected by news that massively affects the US dollar. So thanks for the question, David. And the short answer to both of them is usually yes, but there might be some exceptions. So looking at the euro and Brexit, for example, the reason why the euro should be affected by Brexit news is firstly due to the impact that Brexit will have on both the EU as well as the UK economy, right? Which means that it should move up on good Brexit news and it should move down on bad Brexit news. However, we also need to understand that good Brexit news um, should always be better for the pound compared to the euro, and bad news should always be worse for the pound compared to the euro. And that means that in some cases, good Brexit news might actually weigh on the euro instead of providing upside if the market favors pound longs compared to euro longs at that time. And vice versa, bad Brexit news should be bad for the euro. But if the pound is offered across the board, we might actually see some euro upside across the board if, for example, the euro pound currency pair sees a massive move higher, just as an example. So we do always need to, keep that in mind. It's not only the relationship with Brexit that's important, but also whether cross flows affect strong buying or selling of the pound in something like the euro pound, as an example. In terms of the US dollar, we need to always keep in mind that the euro has almost a 60% weighting in the dollar index, and that means that any significant moves in the US dollar will most likely affect the euro across the board, with the euro dollar obviously being the most traded and most liquid currency pair in the market. If we do see big moves in the euro dollar, it can and sometimes will have spillover effects into the rest of the euro pair. So that's why, in your question regarding the stimulus bill, right, like we have right now, any news that massively affects the US dollar should see the euro move across the board. But do keep in mind that, any broad-based dollar moves will also affect the other major currencies as well, which means that even though the euro might see moves across the pairs, we can expect other currencies to react the same way, which means we might see varying moves in other of the euro pairs. So for that reason, we need to always be aware of the current sentiment that might be driving the other currencies at that time as well. So even though a big move lower, for example, in the dollar index should affect the euro across the board, if at that same time we have a strong risk on sentiment in the market, we can also expect that to provide support for the high beta currencies like the Australian dollar and the Kiwi dollar, which means that even if the dollar is moving sharply lower, for example, even though that'll see upside in the euro dollar, the euro Aussie or euro Kiwi might move more sideways depending on what sentiment is currently driving the Aussie and the Kiwi at that time as well. So in the same way with Brexit news, even though it theoretically should affect the euro and the pound across the board in the same way, the cross flows are important. What happens to the euro pound, for example, but also then what is happening once again with sentiment across the other currencies as well. Because even though the euro should or should not be moving up or down, it doesn't mean that it's going to move up and down across the board on all the currencies, because it will depend on what's happening to risk sentiment at that time. So if we have a look at this chart, it's a great example. Right now, we're seeing lots of downside pressure coming into the dollar index. So that'll mean that we expect the euro, based on that weighting, to move up across the board. But right now, we also have a strong risk on push taking place in currencies like the Kiwi and the Aussie, right? So if we take a look at the basket now, we can see the euro dollar is moving up as we would expect, but euro Aussie is actually moving down. Euro Kiwi is actually moving down on the back of that risk flows that we're seeing in the Aussie and the Kiwi. So always keep in mind that it's not just about the pound, or not just about Brexit, or not just about the dollar. As in all things trading, it's normally not just one thing. It's always a few variables in play at the same time that we always need to be aware of and keep track of. So, David, I hope that helps with the question. Any others, please don't hesitate to let us know.